Okay, another video here, and this video was sparked by a conversation I had with one of my meditation students today about faith and about faith in Jesus. And I thought that I would share with you how I came to Christ and how I came to believe in the New Testament, and that it was a reliable testimony of Jesus and came from real people. And I sat down to do the video, and I realized I just couldn't find any inspiration. But I knew that I wanted to make a video for you guys on this topic, and I couldn't feel the kind of power I usually feel when I sit down to do a video. It just wasn't there. And so I sat and just reflected for the last 20 minutes or so, and I realized why it is. So let me tell you how I got here. And then I'll tell you why the thing that sparked it off doesn't matter very much to me anymore, even though it turned out to be true. So, I entered into the spiritual path through the New Age movement, and I had the best kind of teacher you could have from that system. His name was Clyde, and he was exceptional. He had exceptional integrity. He was vigilant for God in a profound way, and he was a huge fan of Jesus too. And now it was the New Age Jesus, so there were some problems with his theology, that I discovered over time for myself that were not a fit. But I had a really good teacher, and he got me started on meditation, and he got me started on inventory. And it's really because of him that I ceased what I was seeking in life. And started looking after God alone. And so, a lot of credit has to go to him for getting me on the path in a way that I could believe, and in a way that worked, in a way that was truly transforming. But then he died, and for a while I was sort of teacherless and also foundationless. And what I mean by that is, there was sort of a relativism going on in my thinking, that everyone had a different truth, and everyone's truth was the same, and even if they contradicted, it was okay. And I sort of believed in everything and nothing all at the same time, and I didn't have roots anywhere. And I was doing a retreat up at the Huntsville Monastery, and there were some priests up there that were pretty on fire, but this was back when I was way on fire before the night. And they were telling me, me and my friend, you guys are really going to need a better foundation than what you have eventually. And I was, at that time, I was feeling God's power, intensely, and had been for a number of years, and it was just growing and growing. And I just said, there's no way that's true, man. And because it is really working. I really have God in my life. And they laughed, and we were having fun together. They weren't laughing at me. And they said, well, we still think one day you're going to need a better foundation. And it just wasn't true at the time, but it became true. And I've told people recently that I don't want to share about my personal experience very much anymore. And somebody said they really wish I would, and they really wish I did. And so I think I will, but in a context that I think is healthy. So the first thing that happened is, while I was way on fire, and I mean, I don't know another way to say it. I was having visions all the time, and they were true, and they were really happening the way I saw it. And miracles were coming through, and quite often I was getting struck by blinding white light and feeling the bliss of God. And it was quite a potent time, and it really got my attention. But I had a lot of inner work to do to become a healthy human being, and a lot of corners and nooks and crannies of trauma and suffering and pain that all had to be healed. And at some point, being up in that light was, for me, a distraction from doing that deeper work, and I had to come down and do it. But I didn't know that yet, and everyone around me thought I might get enlightened. They thought I might be enlightened soon. It was quite powerful what was happening. And I had this vision, And the first vision I had that turned out to be true, there was a series of 3 visions in this time that time has told were accurate. And they felt true then, but you never know for sure. It's really hard to know with visions sometimes. But the first vision I had was an owl. It was a dream actually, but they call it a night vision. And an owl came down out of the trees and grabbed me by my shoulders and ate my head. And I died in this vision. And then the next part of the vision was me standing in a forest that was, mostly dead, sort of desolate, sort of like how it looks after a fire. And I didn't like it. I did not like the sound of that one bit. And it spooked me a little, but I continued to be on fire for a few months after that. But it was like a specter in my mind, that maybe this time was coming where it was going to be hard. And this was, my 9th year or so of it just being an ascent of greater and greater bliss until I was hitting these times of complete union. And for days and days at a time, I was walking around in what I believe is an enlightened state minus the beginning stages. But whatever the higher stages give you, I believe I had that for the most part for, permanently. And so miracles and all that kind of stuff was flowing through, and getting into the void was just a matter of closing my eyes and just drifting in. There was no work at all. It was just a pretty significant time. But after that vision with the owl, one day I woke up and it was just gone. And I know you guys know this. Most of you know this. And it was really gone. And I had entered the night. And that's how I found Christianity, because it was at that time that I realized I needed help, because nobody understood what was happening to me. No one in my circle, and I knew a lot of people back then. I went to a lot of different people and asked about it. And, they kind of understood, some of them. Most people tried to fix it. Most people, would have called it depression or, I don't know what, but something radical had happened to me. And what had happened was I had gone from spending most of the previous 9 years in stages 5, 6, and 7 to being brought into stage 1. I guess 2. I guess stage 2, and it happened overnight. And it was also kicked into gear by this experience where, while meditating, I heard someone come in my room, and they put a bowl on my head, and I felt the bowl go on my head. It was almost like I could see them, but my eyes were closed, and I was meditating. And someone put a bowl on my head, and when they put that on my head, I was never able to go into the higher places again until the last few years, maybe 5 years. I was completely cut off from it for, I don't know how long now. I'm not good with numbers, 10 years or so. It was gone. And then that vision with the owl, and then someone put something on my head, and I couldn't go into the upper stages anymore. And I was locked in stage 2, but it was 9 years into my journey. And I had known nothing but, I had known intense purification the whole time, for sure. But I'd known nothing but intense purification or absolute bliss. And the bliss was 80% of the time, 90% of the time. And then at the end, it was most of the time. And at the very end, all the time. A complete kind of union. And so when it went away, it was a devastating blow to me. It was a wound that cut quite deeply. And it shattered it shattered my spiritual life utterly. And I was left alone for a year without understanding it at all and feeling like God was gone and lost to me. And, you might say, well, why was he doing a retreat? Well, I had begun to teach with the permission of my teachers at that time. I wasn't a beginner 9 years in, with the kind of experiences I was having. They didn't consider that a beginner. And so I was doing those things. But then it all went away, and it all went away completely. And I was left with nothing. My teacher had died, and I was alone in it. And so I started looking around for answers, and nobody had any. Nobody understood it. Nobody could place it in a legitimate context, you know. And what I mean by context, no one could place it in a context of a person begins at the beginning of spirituality and they end up in the end. And here are all the stages in between. And here's the stage you're in. Nobody that I knew could place it in that kind of context. And so I happened to be doing a retreat up at the monastery, and there was a monk there that was really gentle and kind. And I had met some monks there, but I didn't feel a resonance with any of them. But this guy, I could feel him, and he turned out to be a contemplative, and he turned out to spend 3 or 4 hours a day in prayer. And so I went to see him, and I'm telling too much of my story, but he got out a book, and he read to me exactly what was happening to me. And he put it in a context that made perfect sense. And that's when I realized that this guy and this Christian tradition really knew what it was talking about, because it understood where I had been, and it understood where I was, and it could place it in a context that really made sense. And that's not something that falls off trees, you know. You don't just walk around and meet people who get that kind of thing. That's not really common. So I started to move towards this monk as sort of a spiritual director. And he was Catholic, and he was a Trappist, and he was a contemplative. And so he began to expose me to this dimension of Christianity that is prayerful and meditative that I did not know existed. You know, I was raised with a pretty deep prejudice against Christianity. My mom liked Jesus fine, but she was New Age. And so she was taught, you know, by sources that I now realize have no foundation or even historical foundation. They're just false. But, you know, people in that system don't know that. And so she was taught that Jesus really studied in India, and, you know, that Christianity really had lost all of its potency and power. Jesus had it, but he didn't get it from the Jewish tradition. She was just taught a hodgepodge of things that turn out to be historically untenable. There's just no evidence for any of it. And when in fact there's a ton of evidence for Jesus being an actual Jew, and that the Jewish religion turns out they do produce saints. I don't know how we could not know that. We're on a planet with a bunch of Jewish people, and the Jewish system produces saints to this day. So I don't know why it's weird to think that Jesus was produced by the Jewish tradition. It kind of makes no sense to me now. Why wouldn't, right, a tradition that produced Moses and Elijah, Abraham, you know, all the patriarchs, why would a tradition that produced that many saints and that has continued to produce saints be unable to produce Jesus? It makes no sense now. But at the time, you know, all that made sense. So I had a lot of prejudice against Christianity because it was the one religion that my community and the people I was with at the time sort of thought had no power at all. And we were open to everything. The more exotic, the better. But the more traditional, the less we liked it. And so meeting this monk and having the contemplative dimension of Christianity shown to me was quite profound. And you know, and I began to read the theology, and I began to read their mystics, and I started to notice that indeed what had been happening to me for that previous 9 years was very much what they were talking about. And I'm not just talking the experiences. I'm also talking about the way they came to those experiences, which is through prayer and meditation. And I just began to see that I had been being led by Christ all that time. And I was already a disciple of Christ. I was a disciple of the New Age Christ. But I was naive. I didn't know there was a difference. So Jesus wasn't going to turn me away. So I think, did have Jesus in my life, but I had misunderstandings about him. And I started to get, you know, touched by the Jesus of the New Testament and the Jesus of Christianity. And it started to resonate and seem true to me. And I started to feel the power, a subtle power, nothing like in the upper stages when I was in those upper stages. I began to feel this subtle power that turned out to be God, you know, touching my life on a level, on a deep level, but a level that was harder for me to feel and notice. And I don't want to go into the whole thing because there's so much behind that with the night of sense and the night of the Spirit and all of that. I don't want to get into all that, but I was being touched by Jesus, and but I was also very nervous about being tricked or duped by a religious tradition that could be attractive to me but not be true. And having lost all the bliss and lost all the miracles and lost all the power that was just pouring through me all the time, having all that be gone, I was real nervous about things and careful. And so I did some experiments, and this conversation I had today with a woman triggered this memory, that I did have to take Jesus and fire him out of my life a number of times before I was willing to trust his presence. Now, I realize that may not work for someone who isn't a mystic, or doesn't have any mystical tendencies. But for me, it was a really good method, because I would just say, look, you're out. Jesus, you're out. I'm not open to you. I've got to go back to what I had before. And what would happen is whatever was happening in me that was authentic through Christ would begin to deteriorate and fade. And I would feel this, what I now know is a deep faith and a peace, but not a kind of peace I'd ever felt before. It was some kind of a foundational peace would leave when I would fire Jesus. And I'd go a few days and it would be kind of terrible in the sense that all that had left. And then I would say, okay, I invite you back in, and it would come back. And I don't remember how many times I did that, but I did that a number of times. And I had to do it because I had to be sure for myself that this was really happening, that there really was a Jesus, that because this flavor of power that was coming in was something I had never felt when I was in the New Age movement and when I was studying more Eastern spirituality. I hadn't felt this. This was something different. And so I had to be sure, and I did that for quite a while. And eventually, though, after a number of tries, I could see quite clearly that it just really was, when I invited Jesus in as my Savior, that this other kind of power would enter, and that it really was tied to Jesus, and that I couldn't get it some other way. And that took, I don't know how long, a few months, I guess, of attempting it. And I had some mystical things, this was during the night, so it wasn't like I was having a lot of bright experiences. But, once I was weeding in some rocks in our house, and I felt Jesus come and sit by me out of nowhere. I wasn't thinking about Jesus, and it just came. And so I felt like he was around, and my wife also at that time started to get drawn to Christ without any visions of any kind, except when she once had a vision of Moses appear to her. This was before she was Christian or even thought about Jesus, and she had an experience with Moses who came to her, and we believe now there's a ton of relevance to this. She's totally Christian now, and she's a Jesus freak even. But she is also someone who resonates deeply with the law, not in an unhealthy way. It's where she resonates, and so it makes sense that Moses would appear to her. Even though at the time we didn't know anything about the law or what Moses stood for, we didn't really know any of that. But as time went on, it made sense. But anyway, so as I got more comfortable and I started to realize that it really was Jesus Christ that was in my life, and it was really Jesus that was doing it. It wasn't me making it up. I was willing for that to be true. I didn't mind. I wasn't yet attached to the system, didn't care. I just wanted what was true, and really now is the same thing. I just want what's true. And so, but if Jesus is some powerful figure that is helpful on the spiritual journey, I wanted to know. And so I became quite convinced that through experimentation, through firing him and bringing him back, and then also through reading Christian literature, contemplative literature. I'm not knocking any Christian traditions, but I particularly am fond of Christianity that looks back and listens to the early saints. The first 300 years of Christianity is a very rich time that produced mystics, people who really had profound intimacy with God, who were also scholars and who left their writings, and we can read those writings today. And so I'm a big fan of Christianity that has not lost its deeply mystical and deeply contemplative and deeply meditative spirituality. It's the only Christianity that could save me, because I had so much suffering and so much pain when I started the journey, more than most. Of all the people I've worked with, maybe 3 people have had more pain than I started with. And that's out of a lot of people. So I had a lot of suffering that needed to be healed, and I needed something that really worked. It couldn't just be something neat or pretty or flashy. It had to be something that worked. And this Jesus thing that had come in was really working, and it was healing deep-seated psychological wounds and emotional suffering that I had from my upbringing and from various life experiences that I won't go into today, but my whole life was just a series of painful encounters that happened. And I look at it all now as beneficial in the long run for me coming close to God, but certainly leaving deep scars, right, and wounds within me. But I wanted to share this one experience that I had that really got me to go. So right as I was doing this experimentation back and forth, or maybe at the end of it, I really can't honestly say which, I had a profound vision. And now we know visions aren't always true, and we know that we take them with a grain of salt. And we know that there are degrees of visions, and that an intuition that just comes in the mind, could be wrong a lot. One second, let me just, thoughts that come to our minds can be wrong more, but there are certain kinds of experiences that are considered more reliable. And I had one that is sort of the considered to be the most reliable kind you can have. And they're not often wrong. And they could be, though. You still always take things with a grain of salt. But I wanted to share with you guys what happened to me. So by this time, I had met the monk, and I understood the context of what was happening to me, why all that spirituality had been taken away, why it was not an act of vengeance from God or abandonment, but it was an act of love, and that I was moving into a new stage of spirituality. I had that much understanding from the monk. And he had me reading a book on Christian theology, and I was reading it. And I think I remember I was reading about the Trinity, but I don't really know what I was reading at the time. I don't know. I know the book. I know what book it was. I don't know what chapter I was reading. But I remember just, I was feeling so much love and so much Christ as I was reading it, that I started to close my eyes, as is often the case. It's a nice way to read. You read and then close your eyes and drift in it, and read some more and drift. And over a period of a couple hours, maybe, the power of God became so strong that I was overtaken by it. And I was absorbed into pure, blinding white light. And it's, I say it that way as if people are going to understand that. And I shouldn't, because it's not like I just saw white light. I was in a dimension of pure power, and I could experience and feel that power. It wasn't just seeing white light. It wasn't like that at all. It was infinite glory and infinite love and infinite knowledge and infinite consciousness. And it was so complete that I did not know I was Clinton, or that I had a body, or that there was anything but this light. I would only know this light. And I went into that, and the experience lasted about, I don't know, 3 hours or 4 hours. It lasted a long time. But what happened is 3 different times I was pulled into that light and lost myself utterly. And this is Sakchitananda, and this is, sort of the highest kind of mystical experience a person can have. The only thing higher than it is if it sticks forever and never goes away. So it's not, I'm not saying that to impress anyone, but I just want you to know this wasn't just a little dream or an intuition even that keeps returning. This was something quite profound and rare, and something the Christian mystics say is not often wrong. It's you don't have these kinds of encounters and come out with misinformation. It's something higher than most of the kinds of ways of receiving information that could be wrong. And so for the first time I was absorbed into that light. Don't know how long, 40 minutes, whatever, I don't know. But then all of a sudden I had a face again, but only this much. And behind me there was no body, no head, no brain, just a face. And then I would remember I'm Clinton. I would remember, I'm Clinton. And there was a sense when this happened that I was looking at the universe, the created universe. And then my head just disappeared and I'd be gone again for however long, 40 minutes or, it lasted 3 or 4 hours. So the whole vision, the whole experience. So now it's twice now that I was absorbed back into the light completely. There's no Clinton, there's no world, there's no time. It's like you're right in the Trinity. It's like you're right in the power of God, and there's nothing else. And then my face went out again for a third time. And this time, I could see the planet and creation. And I understood that everything I was viewing was made by God. And then I had a vision. And it was just a vision of me standing on my mother-in-law's lawn in the grass, just standing in the grass. And I said, I get it. I was very excited in this vision. I get it. I get it. The New Testament really is what Jesus left so we could become just like him. And I knew that also meant miracles too. I knew that. And then the experience ended, and it had been 3 or 4 hours. So I must have spent, 2.5 hours or so absorbed in the infinity of God, in that highest sort of state of consciousness that people can attain. And I'm saying this because I want you guys to believe. And you have to be told in order to believe. The Bible says faith comes by hearing. And so I'm telling you this because I want you to be able to put away hang-ups about Jesus and doubts about Jesus. And I want you to hear, this is the truth being spoken to you. Jesus really existed. No one doubts that anyway. Modern scholars don't doubt Jesus existed at all. There are accounts that are not biblical, okay? Historical accounts of Jesus written by pagan scholars. One of them says that, when in the New Testament, when it says the graves opened and people rose from the dead and walked around and people ascended into heaven, well, there's a pagan historian who wrote of that happening. And so, look, Jesus existed. He was on the planet for real. And he really healed people, and he really raised people from the dead. And he really spoke in a way that touched people so profoundly that it changed their lives. And he really left the disciples, and the disciples really produced other disciples. And they really did grow Christian communities that were attaining union with God. I mean, John's gospel, certainly, John's Christian community, the community he was a part of, there's no doubt that that's quite a mature spiritual community that had reached very high places with God. So that vision happened to me, and that was it. So from then on, I was willing to put aside the prejudice I had about the New Testament. And, if you were raised Christian, you can't relate to this, but I was raised in the New Age movement, and so I had a ton of prejudice against the New Testament. I believed it had been changed. I believe, they said it's been translated so many times that we don't even know what it really says, and that's a kind of a lie that is told. And it is a lie, actually, because it's translated from one source so many times. It's not as if A was translated to B and then they lost A, and then B was translated to C and they lost B. C was translated to D and they lost D. So that now you're 30 down the line. That's not how it is at all. There's one source, and they're all 30 are translated from that one source. We've really lost nothing. No one really thinks we've lost anything. No one really thinks Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are not reflective of the Christian communities of their day. Nobody thinks that. Most serious scholars don't think that. There was a time when scholars were about ready to just, write Christianity off as a completely lost system. No way to know. But then certain gospels were found, certain fragments were found in clay pots, the Nag Hammadi library, and the fragments were almost identical. Maybe a letter was missing to what we have in the New Testament. So really, we do have what's left in the New Testament is what Jesus left, and that's what my vision said. And so I was willing to put my prejudice aside and say, okay, finally, now there's a book I can trust because I do trust Jesus. I knew I trusted him, but I didn't trust any literature about him because of the way I was raised and the things I was told about how it all been changed to control people and to basically for control is what I was taught, to keep people down. So they took Jesus' teachings and they perverted them until so that they could use it as a means of social control. This is what I was taught. But this vision shattered. It broke through the programming of my mind, and it allowed me to look at the text with an open heart and an open mind for once in my life. And I even had like a sort of momentary, it didn't last, but I had a momentary couple of times when the letters seemed to glow with white light as I read them, just for moments. And I think it took that much for this knucklehead, hard-headed person to finally hear the gospel. But so I tell you about this vision that it passes the muster of the strict Christian mystics. This kind of a vision passes the tests. Most don't, but that kind does. Other visions can be true too, but they can also be really false. But the kind I had, and with the intensity that I had it, the hours of time I spent in this union with God, it passes the muster. And it told me I could trust the New Testament. And I could have come to that trust many other ways, right? I could have just not been told lies about the New Testament as a kid. That would have helped. I could have been raised by good Christian parents who showed me the love was real. And showed me historical context and what scholars think about this gospel and that gospel. And, I could have been raised in an intellectually rigorous and honest setting that had real love and come to the same trust. But this is the way God had to get my attention and sort of knock me upside the head and shake me up and get me to trust the New Testament. But as I sat down to do this video, my idea was to tell you this story. But hanging my faith on this story felt like a lie. And I had to sit for a good long time to understand why. And the reason why is because that's the least reason I believe now. That's the smallest reason that I believe in it. I mean, it happened and I believe because of it, no doubt. But what's convinced me more is following Jesus and seeing what happens. That's what's convinced me more, far more than that vision. If I could only have one of two things, the knowledge of the experience of Christ transforming my life or that vision, I would take the experience of God transforming my life. I would take that over the vision any day. although the vision has turned out to be true and passes the rigorous tests. I was in union. I wasn't even fully myself when I experienced it. There was no thought. When you're in that light, there's no you, man. You don't think. You're in infinity. And that happened to me. But you know what? I don't care about that. That's not how I know. I know because of what Jesus said. He said, anyone that wants to know if what I say is true, let him do what I say and see for himself. That's all paraphrased. But his basic answer is, why don't you try it and tell me what you think? And so it's like we've got to be able to put aside all these prejudices and just try it, right? And think about it for ourselves as adults with adult minds. And what happens is it works. It does what it says it will do. And over time, you get more and more initiated into the reality of Jesus. There's a woman in class who's having some of that happen now. And sometimes she will say that, it's this is my paraphrase. I don't know the words she uses, but it's astounding how real Jesus is. Jesus starts to become very real. Recently, as I've been going into prayer, the experience of the Father, of pure being, that's the Father, pure being, it has come over me so profoundly that I weep. I am weeping. I am being loved by God in a way that is not wishful thinking. In fact, it's utterly devoid of any hopes of any kind. I'm just down in that absorption, but I'm not unconscious. And this love begins to dawn on me. And I experience the love of the Father, the love of pure being, just holding me in its embrace. And that is happening to me. How do you know you got out of bed this morning if you did? Because you did. And that's how I know God exists. Because I'm down in there experiencing God in that way. And it's interesting too. Just another layer of something, fuzz. Only a small layer, but another layer of some kind of illusion, noise, suffering, something fell away from me. And when you close your eyes, you're looking at your consciousness, and you're experiencing your consciousness. And it all went silent. And in that darkness, it wasn't even light, just in that darkness, there is nothing but God and love. And love. And so that vision, as powerful as it was, I would not trade that for what Christ has done in my life, for what Christ has done in my marriage, for what Christ has done in this wounded human, so many scars, for the things God has healed, and for how obviously true the scriptures are when you understand their spiritual context and meaning. When they say this will happen and you're not even thinking about what they said would happen, and then in 6 months or a year, it happens to you. When you start to live in the landscape of Christ, and you've let go of any hopes, you don't care how it turns out, you want only what God wants, you're not carrying ideas around in your mind about it, you're just saying whatever is true, I want to know. And where what comes is what the scriptures say will come. And then, of course, it's true. Of course, it's true. When you start to feel the personal love of Jesus, no less so than you feel the love of a parent or a lover or a pet or a child or a friend, when that is your experience, when wounds that you can't even identify come to light and are healed by God, and it feels like all you did was ride this flow of energy from point A to point B, and you have no idea how it's coming, no idea what's going to come or how it's going to turn out. And then you can look back and see that was a perfect healing of this issue. Of course it's true. Magically, a pause button appeared on my screen for the first time in 50 videos that I've done. I can now pause mid-recording, so this is going to help a lot. So, of course it's true. Of course it's true. It's true. But you have to put aside prejudice long enough to really try it. But you can't put aside prejudice in a childish way. You can't be afraid of your doubts, and you can't be afraid of your questions. You can't be afraid of those thoughts that come that say, what if it's all bullcrap? You can't be afraid of that. The priest who trained me in theology told me that if a person was raised Christian and didn't go through that serious questioning and doubt, where all the questions are actually brought to light instead of stuffed away, then they cannot have come to a mature adult faith. And he said, we must be adult Christians with adult faith. We are not afraid of questions. We're not afraid of doubts if we hide those doubts away. If we don't let them come to the light and live with them, wrestle with them, consider them, if we don't do that, then our spiritual maturity will always be stunted. It will always be immature. It will always be childish faith. We need adult faith. We need grown-up faith that is afraid of no questions, that is afraid of nothing lurking within that might doubt. But we also can't just sit in the doubt. We must examine it. Questions arise, they must be asked. You must enter into conversation with your spiritual director about them. And because we must move past all of that. And you can, and that's the beginnings of the faith. And so you must not hide them in a box and pretend they're not there or you won't be Christian. Not that. Not afraid to ask because the whole thing might fall apart if I ask. Not that. But look, if it's true, it'll stand up in some way to my questions, right? To my doubts. And maybe more importantly for many of us, to our pain and suffering and wounds. That if Jesus isn't there, it won't get healed. And it needs to be healed. So that's how I came to Christ. And even though I had quite a radical mystical experience with God that revealed to me that I could trust the New Testament, today looking back, I can't look at that as the high point of how I have come to faith. It's certainly what allowed me to put aside prejudice long enough to look. And it's certainly something that is burned into my mind forever and I could never forget. I wouldn't ever have to even bother thinking about it, and that memory never leaves. It's etched into my brain. But the ordinary way of growing in faith is where I would hang my hat. And it's that level of faith that all of you are also growing in. Some of you have had visions, but see, that's okay. But see, faith is something Jesus will grow in us for real. It's a living thing. And we must grow in it. We must take responsibility for the importance of growing in it. We must wrestle with those doubts and bring them to God and not stuff them away in a corner where they grow mold and fester, but take them to God and to each other. Because God is real. All of this is real. Okay, thank you all very much. I love you all. I'm very grateful for you all. God bless everybody.